When we are babies, pleasure and pain play a different role than they do as adults. As we've discussed earlier, in adulthood, pleasure and pain exist to help guide our behavior. However, while we are infants, we do not have the power to alter our circumstances and are entirely dependent on caregivers in order to navigate how we survive our environment. The infant is wiring its brain and body to be best suited to navigating its environment later in life when it becomes more capable and therefore has agency. So, in order for the nervous system to wire itself according to a relevant blueprint, it has to take in data rapidly in order to understand what is in alignment and what is out of alignment. And this is where pleasure and pain come in. So, a pleasurable experience to an infant nervous system means that the way the biochemical structure is creating itself is in alignment with the environment. And so the benefit to an infant experiencing pain, despite the fact that it can't really do anything about it, is it is the nervous system's way of knowing in real time that there is something about following the current blueprint that is not aligned with the current environment. And the nervous system needs to know this rapidly so that it can make changes and correct course, which is, of course, what we call epigenetics. The way an infant's brain develops is by, as quickly as it can, creating hundreds of thousands of neural pathways. And most of these are created to sense the potential of that pathway. And for that reason, most of these neural pathways sort of exist to be put to the test of time to see if they're used or not. And the ones that are used are strengthened. The ones that are not are actually left to sort of drift away. For children under the age of 3, for children in their first 3 years of life, every single second, there are between 700,000 and over 1 million new neural synaptic pathways created within the brain. The primary cause of this rapid neurogenesis is the fact that humans are one of the few species that continue to gestate after birth. The reason for this is because if we had the full amount of time to finish our gestation within the womb, we would literally be too large to be born. But another severe benefit to this rapid neurogenesis is to adaptively recalibrate to the environment, to continually take in new information to decide what genes are more important and therefore which should be utilized and strengthened. So, for example, there was a famine in the Netherlands which caused a great deal of food insecurity. And what was intriguing is that all of the infants who were gestating during this famine were found to be way more likely to be obese. And the reason is the infant nervous system found an understanding in the stress levels of their mothers that storing energy was peak priority. And so their fat cells developed in ways to store more energy and expend less. Because the body itself was preparing for an environment where there isn't enough energy to go around, and so all of the food should be utilized to its maximum efficiency. And I would venture that this is only possible because an unborn baby can feel pain, can feel that there is a discomfort, and have a visceral understanding that the blueprint it is following to build its body is currently out of alignment with its environment. I came across this example by accident in a book about food addiction and processed food manufacturing. The book is called Hooked by Michael Moss. Though it's an interesting book, it has very little to do with the kinds of things that I'm talking about here today. Another interesting example that I came across by accident was something I came across 10 years ago, and I don't remember where I found it and what book it was in. But it was a piece of history wherein a dominant empire wanted to understand how babies learn language. I believe this was in Rome. And how they decided to experiment with this was to have mothers interact with their babies in certain different ways in order to see which behaviors had an impact on language and how quickly the child learns it. So some of the mothers were instructed to not make eye contact or touch their children in order to see if that feeling of connectedness were a contributing factor to how swiftly a baby learns language. They had to stop this experiment when the babies that weren't touched or looked at were literally dying. Now, there are a lot of implications here, and I want to try to go over them to show how prevalent this is in terms of epigenetics. The first question that should be answered is, how can a lack of affection cause a body to physically die? And we have to keep in mind that an infant is in the process of developing its nervous system. And so it's reasonable to assume, and all of the science points to this, that the blueprint of how to build a body that is locked within our DNA is so dependent on social attachment that without enough affection triggering the genetic responses that are required to develop a nervous system, then that nervous system cannot be developed because the genetic information is not stimulated by the attachment that is vital for our DNA to operate as it intends to. I guess a more simple way to put it is love must be present in order for the genes within our cells to function properly. And this would mean, of course, in terms of childhood brain development as well as neuroplasticity and epigenetics, that social support is essential to the health of our biology, even to the very core and the very roots of our physiology. And this notion could really help to shed light on what might be a dangerous myth to believe regarding evolution. That myth being that we are the culmination of the survival of the fittest, as in strength and capability being the backbone of survivalism. Whereas with our species, what is most likely more the case is we are the culmination of millions of years of survival of the nurtured. And I want to talk about the discussion regarding a healed femur being the earliest sign of human civilization. The argument goes like this. The femur is the largest bone in the body, and it's essential for almost every difficult task we do to survive, whether it's hunting or foraging or making a voyage to get water, fighting off predators, etc. It is just an essential bone to have intact. And so if we were simply lonesome creatures attempting to be as strong as possible to survive, any time a femur would break, that would be the end of that life, because the individual would no longer be capable of providing for themselves or defending themselves. And so a healed femur is a sign of tribal cooperation and therefore civilization. Though this is speculation, it is certainly one that I endorse. Even if one of our ancestors broke a femur and somehow, without the help of any other person, found a way to survive long enough for that femur to heal, that would no doubt be the exception and not the rule. One way that our nervous system ensures that we seek a sense of community is the pain of loneliness. And loneliness, again, is the miracle of pain, because the brain creates this intense sense of discomfort through that narcotic neurotransmitter experience in order to push us toward a community. And when we look at infant brain development and the infant's need for attachment, it's easy to see why connection is so foundational to our instincts and our biology. One important thing to understand about the development of the nervous system is the difference between explicit memory and implicit memory. And what explicit memory is what we typically think of as memories. That means that it's something lingually narrative. Perhaps there's an image to it. It's a part of a rational story that we can tell ourselves. Implicit memory, however, are non-lingual and are not something that we recall. What implicit memories are those early wirings of the nervous system before our sense of continuity and our rational centers of the brain exist. Implicit memories also happen throughout our lives, but it's most powerful and most prevalent in those early stages before we can utilize rationality. So, an example of what this looks like is we once had a cat named Guy. And we got him while he was still technically a kitten, but we didn't have him in our lives from the very moment he was born. We got him a little after. And he's a cat that clearly believed there wasn't enough food to go around for him. And we, of course, made sure that he always had as much food as he would ever need. Same with all the cats. And he had a habit of gorging himself as if it was his last meal before some drought or before somebody takes the rest of it or something like that. And he would consistently do this to the point where he would overfill his stomach and he would throw up a bunch of the food, and a lot of it didn't even look digested at all. So before we got him, sometime in his early kitten experience, maybe there were more cats in the litter than his mother had nipples, and because of that, he may have just assumed that there's not always enough sustenance for him to get his needs met, and when he can get that sustenance, to take full advantage of it. It could be that he was the runt of the litter and would be pushed off of the mother when one of his siblings were hungry. I don't really know, but also looking back on this does not shock me that he was probably the best hunter of a cat that we ever had. He killed lizards, bats, squirrels, birds, mice, and he was incredibly healthy. In fact, he lived with us for 16 years. And I remember probably when he was 14 years old, I woke up because he would just always cuddle up to me in bed. I woke up to the sound of him retching, which is a very, familiar sound, and I just kind of looked at him and I'm like, dude, we're gonna feed you. Like, you don't have to keep doing this to yourself. And at that point, it really sunk in, and I realized that this is something that he's gonna do for the rest of his life. If he hasn't learned in the past 14 years that we will always provide for him, then there's a good chance he won't learn it. And now that I've learned more about the brain and the nervous system, I can really see why this is. And it's because the functionality of how he operates based on that implicit memory of there not being enough food is the foundation upon which his later instincts are developed. And even in terms of his learning, that visceral information of there not being enough results in a strong confirmation bias. So it's important to understand implicit memory as a visceral foundation for learning epigenetic lessons that will likely be developed throughout life. And it's also helpful to note that almost everything that triggers us in a way where we overreact out of fear or anger, it is almost always traced back to one of these strong, deeply seated visceral lessons, one or more of these implicit memories. Because as infants, the closest thing to agency and autonomy we had was whether or not to express an emotion of discomfort, such as fear, anger, or sadness. So when we feel something important in our life is out of our control, there is part of our nervous system that says, okay, there's only one thing I can do when I'm powerless, and that is to essentially emotionally freak out in the most expressive way possible so that the caregivers have to acknowledge me. And so when we are dealing with difficult situations in life, I think it's important to ask the question, is my current reaction coming from my powerless toddler brain, or can I respond to this situation as a capable, rational adult who has the capacity to completely articulate what it is that is wrong or out of alignment with my expectation? Now, I want to be clear about something here. I do not want it to come off as blaming parents for not showing enough affection to their children if an adult has any sort of inclination to an emotional outburst. The fact is, when we are infants, part of the difficulty of the implicit memory is we cannot put ideas on trial. So we'll take, I'll give an example of a parent doing everything right that a child can misinterpret. And when that happens, there's no way, even if you understand what was going on in your child's brain, that you can explain what that situation actually was, and that it didn't mean that you didn't love the child or were planning to abandon them forever, or whatever may have caused that outburst of anger or sadness. So let's say you're cuddling with your kid, just laying on the carpet, everything is wonderful. All right. So you sneeze, and you sort of catch your hand up to your nose or whatever. You snot all over yourself. This surprises the baby, but other than being shocked, the baby seems amused, smiles at you. You're looking all around your baby's face to make sure you didn't get snot on it. So you get up, you go to the kitchen or whatever, wash your hands, make sure you're all nice and clean, and then come back to spend more snuggle time with the baby. Again, in that baby's experience, it is making 700,000 to 1 million neural connections or more every single second. So, assuming viscerally this baby has an understanding that when it showed you and expressed its happiness by smiling at you at whatever weird thing just happened, that sneeze, that when you looked around, didn't smile back, didn't make eye contact, and you got up and walked out of the room, that baby on a visceral level may have a sort of epigenetic understanding that if it expresses emotion, it will be abandoned. And when you come back from the kitchen and the baby is distraught that you have left the room, however many seconds that was that it took you to properly wash your hands and get back to the room, that may have been a ridiculously large number of neural synaptic pathways that have formed a bias toward a separation anxiety. And unfortunately, you can't just tell your kid, oh, hey, by the way, there are these things called germs, and I wanted to make sure that I was clean so that when I snuggled with you, I'm not potentially getting you sick. Because this baby doesn't know language. It can't comprehend that kind of thing. And I want to give this example to show that a parent or caregiver can do everything right, but I mean, we're talking vast amounts of new information are being wired into a baby's nervous system every second. And a baby having insecure attachment issues as it grows is not necessarily a reflection of bad parenting. It may very well be a reflection of a misinterpretation by a threat-centric nervous system to attempt to adapt to needing to find a way to navigate survival even if you are abandoned. So when we're talking about the toddler brain, let's say that it's 20 years later, that baby is now going to therapy as an adult because we'll say he has a lot of difficulty expressing emotions, because even though that was just a one-time thing, uh, again, there's the confirmation bias. So until someone is rationally aware of this in later years, it's almost impossible to correct until then. So now, while in therapy, he can slowly discover why he feels that expressing his emotions has always felt like a threat, that being his authentic self may cause abandonment and alienation. And therapy is absolutely great. I think it is a very helpful introspective tool. However, it can only go so far. You cannot talk your implicit memory out of something with new information, which is where experiencing the body or any kind of body work comes in, whether you're talking yoga or meditation, massage, uh, even just love, just cuddling with a loving partner. These things are therapies, breath work, even anything, the polyvagal stimulation, any of these things that are going back to our two branches of the nervous system, the threat response and the rest response, anything that's engaging that rest response and sort of proving wrong the information bias of the threat response by proving to your body that it is safe to be you, it is safe to be autonomous, it is safe to, in this example, express emotions to someone, because if it's someone who loves you and you're making physical contact while you're expressing these emotions, you being held and loved despite sharing your authenticity, or continuing to pay attention to your breath or the feel of your muscles stretching, or dance, or any of these things, singing, uh, it's all an amazing cathartic and healing thing to your nervous system. And I really think it's important to do both. If the goal is to heal, I think it's very important to find a way to talk and articulate and rationally understand why it is you have the habits that you do, and then implement ways of using your body to realign the false interpretations of your early nervous system and attempt to steer the toddler brain into a more accurate direction with how life is and how you are allowed to be you and still be lovable. Also, if this particular thing interests you, I highly recommend the book The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. It deals a lot with the nervous system and how our body holds trauma. And so it really deals a lot with the traumatic response, how to heal, and the way to consciously engage with that implicit memory.